We have been listening to Vice President Harris speak at an event in Raleigh, North Carolina. Harris says the U.S. economy is by almost every measure the strongest in the world. Harris says she wants to build up a middle class as a defining goal of her presidency if she's elected, and will make it a priority to bring down costs that are still too high. She called for working with companies in the construction of 3 million new homes to be built by the end of her first term that are affordable for working and middle class Americans. If she's here with us, I want to bring in CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes. There you are. You're at the rally, Nancy. Interestingly, Harris acknowledged the cost increases, but she blamed greedflation for some of it. She said some companies are seeing record profits, and she said she'll implement the first ever ban on federal price gouging. What does that mean?
That's a great question, Lindsay. We have been asking the campaign exactly what that means. Does that mean that she's proposing imposing price caps on certain types of groceries, or does that mean that the federal government would only step in if there was a crisis and suddenly prices were to spike abnormally? They haven't filled in the fine print yet, which makes it a little bit difficult to gauge exactly how impactful some of these proposals would be. There's no question that this goes a step further than what President Biden proposed when he was running for office. At the same time, it sounds a lot like something that dozens of states do to prevent not just the food industry, but a whole bunch of industries from artificially raising prices steeply in the face of a crisis.
Nancy, has the campaign filled in the lines with this proposal of building 3 million new homes and rentals that are affordable for the middle class? What would that look like?
Yeah, we've got more details on that. So there are a few different aspects of that plan, a very ambitious plan. One of the proposals is to give first-time home buyers, particularly first-generation Americans, $25,000 to help them with their down payments, a recognition that new homes have simply, become out of reach for so many working Americans. There are also some tax incentives she's proposing to ensure that home builders construct homes that these first-time home buyers can buy. And there's also an effort, which she talked about here today, to prevent big corporate landlords from either buying up masses of property and then artificially raising the rents, or colluding with other corporate landlords to raise those rents all at the same level. So, when it comes to housing, she acknowledged that prices, and it's, has a lot to do with the fact that mortgage rates are so high right now, that housing has really become a major issue for working families, both when it comes to renting and buying.
Nancy, whenever we see a candidate speaking at a podium, I'm always looking at who's behind them. This is one of the first rallies I can think of in which there were several children behind her.
I appear to have lost you. I'm not hearing you any longer.
Okay, can you hear me now, Nancy? Do we have Nancy comms back? Okay. We are going to work on getting Nancy back here to answer a couple more questions. But for now, let's bring in David Wessel. He's a senior fellow in economic studies at Brookings and the director of the Hutchins Center on Fiscal and Monetary Policy. So, David, thanks for being here. You were listening along with us. What stuck out to you the most?
Well, I think a couple of things. One is President Biden always talks as if every American is a worker. His view of the economy is there's workers and there's companies, and workers don't have enough allies on their side, so I'm going to be on their side. Kamala Harris, interestingly, she mentions that she's very much focusing on Americans as consumers. And I think it reflects both a worldview, a more modern worldview than Joe Biden's, but also it sure sounds like this was a focus group speech. We know that people are worried about the price of food. We know they're worried about housing. I'm going to have a little proposal for each of those. I don't understand the price gouging thing. It sounds a bit like too much federal regulation for my taste, and it doesn't quite clear how it's going to work. It's clear that she is backing what has been a very strong antitrust policy of the Biden administration, that is to promote more competition. And on the housing thing, well, that sounds really ambitious. I looked it up while she was talking. So last year, we built 1.4 million new houses and apartment units. And she's proposing to increase that by 3 billion. Does that mean on top of what the 1.5 billion we're going to get every year, or is she just basically taking credit for what was likely to happen anyways? I don't know.
Okay. So more questions there. I want to ask you about something that Harris brought up, and that is the child tax credit. And she was talking about how she's going to help expand that. But also she mentioned Trump's proposed tariffs and basically said you will end up paying more for all of your groceries anyway. Can you help us understand a little bit more about what Trump has proposed in terms of tariffs coming in from other countries, but also China?
So I think that if an economist were listening to that speech, that part was a part that many economists would agree with. What she's saying is we do need to subsidize low-wage workers. That's what we do through the Earned Income Tax Credit. And we do need to subsidize families with children. And so that's a clear tax cut because she's proposing things that are not currently in law. Former President Trump is proposing a 10% tariff on everything we import and a 60% tariff on stuff we import from China. He says, oh, the Chinese pay that. But most economists and most academic evidence say it gets passed along to consumers. So she's drawing that contrast, and I think she picked on something that Trump is very vulnerable on, and labeling tariffs as tax increases is not only accurate, but I think it'll play well with the public.
Both campaigns have suggested that they want to eliminate taxes on tips. How would that work economically in ensuring that if that were to happen, which would be very popular, particularly in the state of Nevada, but how are the campaigns saying that they would offset that?
Right. Well, nobody's saying anything about how would it offset anything. One of the things that I think Vice President Harris did by talking about price gouging and pushing pressure on corporations to lower prices, those are things that don't cost the federal government anything. So we don't widen the deficit. The tip thing, in my opinion, is just clear pandering to people who live in Nevada, which is a swing state. President Trump made a very broad thing, and the Harris campaign teased him by saying all those guys on Wall Street will say they make $2 a year and $10 million in tips. So her proposal is somewhat narrower. It's just service and hospitality workers. But it's not clear to me why a bus driver who makes $20 an hour should pay more in taxes than a waiter who makes $5 an hour and $7 an hour in tips or something. I think it would be very hard to enforce. Probably a lot of people get tips and don't pay taxes on them anyways. My guess is this one isn't going anywhere, but because I think it's a campaign promise to Nevada, and once the election's over, somehow that'll get lost. I could be wrong.
Okay. David Wessel, thanks for joining us.